Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Seneca County Board of Supervisors Standing Committee meetings for Tuesday, September 26th. First up, we got Human Resources and Government Operations. Supervisor Jeff Trout.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor, or Chairman. First issue we have is Board of Supervisors approve the reclassification of Psychiatric Social Worker 1 to Psychiatric Social Worker 2.
Support.
Second.
Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Issue number 2, we had pulled from the agenda. I don't know, does that take an action, or we just? All right, that's what I decide. So issue number 3, Board of Supervisors approve reclassification of Staff Resource Assistant to Staff Resource Assistant 2.
Support.
Second.
Any questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Issue 4, Board of Supervisors appoint Amanda Bavrook as clerk to the Board of Supervisors.
Support.
Support. Any questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Issue 5, Board of Supervisors approve approve changing Probation Director 2 from grade 7 to grade 8 on management salary schedule.
Support.
Second.
Any questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Chairman, we have no unfinished business of which I'm aware. Is there any new business to come before the committee? That being it, HRGO is complete. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next, we got Ways and Means. Supervisor Reynolds.
Thank you, Chairman Enzo. First thing we got is a 2022 audit report. Haley, gonna help us with this? Dresser and Malicki are gonna be here too.
Yes, we got the point, like, get up there from Haley, so. How is everyone tonight? Good. I'm Carl Widmer, a partner at Dresser and Malicki. Along with me tonight is also Erica Hanley, a director at Dresser and Malicki, and we're here tonight to present on the results of the county's fiscal year ended December 31st, 2022 financial statement audit. Right off the bat, this is our second year working with the county on the external audit, and was here, I think it was about November last year. I was on the way to Albany to visit family for Thanksgiving, and I was able to give the presentation. So we're happy to be here tonight ahead of the September 30th reporting deadline. Just right off the bat, want to acknowledge the timing this year to get it in by the federal September 30th deadline. So a lot of work and effort and coordination went into place through finance at the county as well as with our staff. So we're happy to be here tonight. Status of the audit, where we're at. We began with some planning work back in January to set up this year's audit, and then the majority of the field work and the testing was performed on site as well as remotely at our office in Buffalo, mainly in the months of July and August. And then most recently in September, we've worked back and forth to work on the draft actual financial statements and reports. So as we stand tonight, we're presenting on the draft financial statements. They haven't been issued yet. We like to present to the board before those go final. But we feel they're in a place that we don't expect any significant changes, and we also expect to submit them and issue them by the end of the week, fulfilling the September 30th deadline. So tonight, similar to last year, there's a presentation in front of you, just a short slideshow to try to condense a little overview of the audit process itself, along with a high-level financial statement highlight reel, if you will, from the general fund for the fiscal year. So moving along to the next slide, the products of our audit. What are the deliverables each year from Dresser and Malicki? Of course, the opinion on our financial statements. The county's financial statements, from the general fund to its capital projects to its enterprise funds, they're put together each year, and as your hired external auditors, we perform an audit to ultimately provide our professional audit opinion on whether they are fairly stated and if they can be relied upon. We're prepared this year to issue what's called an unmodified opinion. That's a clean opinion with no exceptions. So a clean opinion is what is expected. Next is the single audit. Because the county is the recipient and spender of over $750,000 of federal aid, that's the minimum threshold, you're subject to what's called a single audit. And essentially any entity that's receiving that number of dollars or above and spends that in 12 months is subject to a special compliance audit. So we take the compliance requirements straight from the feds and act as an extension of their government and perform a special compliance audit over how the county received and handled the spending of the federal aid that came through the building. There's over $10 million for fiscal year ended December 31st, 2022 of federal expenditures. The results of that compliance audit were a clean audit, no reportable compliance findings. There's also an auditor communications letter that you'll receive in the package. This essentially goes over some of the responsibilities that the county has, being the auditee, as well as what Drescher Malecki is responsible for, being the auditor. On the next slide, there's a few required communications that I'll present tonight. Next is a management letter. This is our opportunity to share ideas and best practices that we have. We work with many governments in New York State, several of them counties, and we see things that if we think they can be shared and benefit whoever we're auditing, we want to share those ideas to perhaps make people's work lives easier or just make a process more sound. So there is a letter that we include those recommendations. Finally, an opinion on the New York State Department of Transportation, similar to that federal aid that the county receives and spends. With New York State DOT, state money, if you receive that same amount, $750,000 or more, you're subject to a state compliance audit. We also performed that audit. The results of that were also a clean audit, no compliance findings. The next slide, auditor communications. As the external auditor, each year we have to review and bring to the governing board of whoever's being audited certain communications. And that'll be covered in that formal auditor communications letter. But at the presentation tonight, we'll highlight a couple of the key communications. First is our responsibility under generally accepted auditing standards. And it's important to note that our responsibility is not to compile the financial statements. The financial statements, that package, that's owned by the county. That's the properties, that is the county's property and their records that are maintained throughout the year in the various departments, recorded in the general ledger. And once they're put together as a financial statement, our job is to provide an opinion on those financial statements so that the users of the county's financial statements, whether it be resident taxpayers, banks, granting agencies, the bond market, ratings agencies, they want to know that the numbers that are presented in there can be relied upon. And while you have certainly a competent and sophisticated staff here, they look to a third party to give that certification, that stamp of approval, that independent approval. And that's why you hire Drescher Malecki as your external auditors. Another item to point out under our responsibility is that our responsibility is to design and perform an audit to give a financial statement opinion. It isn't to search and report on fraud. So I think that's often something that when you hear auditors, you associate with searching for fraud or looking for fraud. That would be more of a forensic auditor. Perhaps the state might have something special they're looking for. Our audit is designed to gain assurance over the dollars in the financial statements and make sure that they're accurate. That's not to say if we encountered something that was of a material dollar amount, we think our audit would discover that and we would report on it. But nothing to report this year, but just wanted to bring up the goal of our audit is a financial statement opinion, not searching for fraud. The next two items, significant accounting policies and estimates. The numbers in your financial statements got there using certain estimates and certain accounting policies that are used primarily in the finance department. And with those, the communication from us to this group is really in the spirit of transparency. Has anything changed because if they changed the way an estimate was calculated or a certain policy was performed, you might look at this year's financial statements and think you're able to compare it to last year's, but it wouldn't be apples to apples. So we review the policies and estimates each year and say, were you consistent with past years? And this year, you were consistent. There were no significant changes from the last year. If you recall my presentation last year, we had a few items that we reported on here being a first year, made some significant changes, but the 2022 financial statements should stack up to 2021's pretty well from a comparative perspective. The next one, probably the most important, if users of the county's financial statements are going to rely on Drescher and Malecki's opinion that the financial statements are fairly stated, it's critical that we're independent from the county and we're unbiased and objective throughout the performance of our audit. It wouldn't be appropriate if my brother was on the board. You know, I would have to step back from that audit. There would be a conflict of interest. So each year we review our relationships with the county, our entire staff. We review and make sure that there's nothing that would interfere with our position being the external auditor. This year, again, free and clear of any independence issues. Other matters, really just to report on that we did receive full cooperation. We work with several departments throughout the course of the audit and also received what we call a full scope. Everything that we asked for, we were granted access to and were provided the support that we asked for. If anybody tried to, hide anything or say, why don't you look at this one instead, we could take that as trying to direct the audit, and that would be a problem. No instances like that this year. So any changes or any questions on the audit process? I'll hand it over to Erica to go over some of the general fund results. All right.
So I'll take you briefly through some of the financial statement updates and highlights for the audit. As Carl mentioned, this is primarily focused on the general fund of the county. Taking a look at page 4, this is a 5-year trend of the general fund, the revenues and other financing sources, which are the blue line on that graph, as compared to the expenditures and other financing uses, which is the red line on that graph. So you can see that for the 2022 year end, the blue line, your revenues did exceed the red line, your expenditures. That was a difference of about $5.7 million. So that is the overall increase in general fund balance for the 2022 fiscal year. Total revenues came in at about $73.4 million. That's a $4.5 million increase over the prior year's $68.8 million. Primarily, that is attributable to the increases in sales tax revenue. That was about a $1.7 million increase year over year. There were also some increases in state aid of about $890,000, and then about a $568,000 increase year over year related to some of the sales tax acquired property, the gain on that. On looking at the expenditure side of things, that red line, total expenditures came in at $67.7 million. Compared to the $61.1 million from 2021. That was an increase of about $6.6 million. Those increases were pretty over the board, spread over the board. There were increases in general government support of about $1.2 million, public safety of $1.7 million, health of $1 million, and those are really just general overall increases. Inflationary costs, some increases in salaries, utilities, equipment purchases, just overall across the board there. Moving on to the next slide. This is a 5-year trend of the ratio of revenues and transfers in to expenditures and transfers out. So we like to take a look at this. Really the goal of government is to have the revenues as close to expenditures as you can in any given year to be that 1 ratio. That would indicate that revenues are the taxes being levied are supporting 1-for-1 the services being provided to the government. Of course, that's not perfect. There's different scenarios that occur. So we look at this from an audit perspective over a trend. And your average for the past 5 years has been 1.05. So pretty close to 1 on average at the county. Moving on to slide 6. This presents your total fund balance in the general fund, and it's broken up into two categories. The red category represents the fund balances that are tied up in certain ways. So non-spendable fund balance, that's typically what represents your prepaid balances. There's also restricted fund balances. Those are your legal reserves, money that can't be touched except for those legal, except for what's prescribed by those legal reasons. And then also other assignments. Those are your encumbrances or your budgetary carryovers year to year. And those total $24.2 million. There was an increase of about $4.8 million there. That was partially attributed to an increase in those budgetary carryovers, and then also an increase in the reserve for tax reduction for the 2022 fiscal year as well. And then really taking a look at that blue section, that's your unassigned fund balance or the available fund balance at year end. That came to $13.2 million at December 31st, 2022, for a total fund balance of $37.5 million in the general fund at year end. And that $13 million, taking a look at it and compared to what your 2022 expenditures were, that number makes up about 19.6% of your general fund appropriations. Any questions on those? No, it's a lot of information thrown to you all at once. As far as observation goes, as Carl mentioned, there were no reportable findings, no material weaknesses, no significant deficiency or compliance findings. In our prior year audit report, there were 2 material weaknesses, so just making the point here to acknowledge that those have been really cleared up. The audit preparedness was at a point where we were able to issue by the September 30th deadline. There was also a finding last year related to the capital asset records. Those have also been cleaned up. Those were provided to us in a state that we're audit ready this year. We do issue a management letter, which is not any reportable findings. It's just certain best practices that we've observed, future reporting requirements. Those items within that letter are discussed with management, and those really pertain to kind of formalizing some of the current policies that are in place at the county. So things are happening correctly and appropriately, but just getting those formalized so that they can continue to operate that way. So areas like journal entries, the allowance accounts, getting that calculation formalized, and then considering a lease policy with the implementation of a new GASB that occurred this year. That concludes the formal presentation. Again, any questions at this point? Sure. Sure. So that's the fluctuations will occur, and that's really the discretion of this board to determine where you feel comfortable. So if you're comfortable having those revenues slightly above so that you can have that fund balance a little bit higher, that unassigned fund balance or your rainy day fund, that's your discretion. We just like to look at it to make sure that it's not, too high, that it's not flagging anything that doesn't look reasonable. Yeah. Anything else? The contact information for Carl and I are on this slide, so if anything else comes to mind, please feel free to reach out to us at this, upcoming or at any point throughout the year. We're happy to help. Sure.
Okay, thank you. No other questions. I guess we'll move on to the next one. Yep, thank you. Number 2, introduce county local law H, Cold War Veterans Property Tax Exemption. Who's going to talk on this? Anybody? Oh, Dave Etman, okay.
This proposal was done at the request of Supervisor Shipley in order to bring us across the board with the veterans exemption. This was the Cold War veterans exemption, covers a period There is some overlap with the veterans exemptions, but it also has some standalone. So this is an accepted, it's a New York State available property tax exemption. It is, as I said, there is some overlap with the, what we call the current veterans exemption, but you're not allowed to take both. You're limited to one or the other. So that's really what it's about.
Do the towns have to do this too?
Nobody has to do it.
Right.
It's just, it would, I think, as I recall, I believe, I think actually Seneca Falls has adopted the Cold War veterans exemption. I'm not aware of any of the other towns that have done so.
Okay. Oh, and they can't do school districts too, right?
Right, this one does not cover
Yeah,
schools.
that's right. Okay.
I think there's a limitation in there as well, at the state level, not at our level.
All right. Any idea how many people are going to probably jump on this? Is there any
I-
guesstimate?
I did not ask for anything from the Veteran Services Office. I can simply tell you, it does have restrictions. Again, first of all, you can't have both if you're in the overlap period. It has a 15% or $6,000 maximum exemption. And for disabled veterans, there is a higher rate, but it still caps out at $20,000 exemption, and it's based on the amount of the service-connected disability.
Okay.
Is this based on using the same percentages and numbers in the Seneca Falls proposal?
Well, this is basically the state's provision. This is what it is, so it's the same basic numbers.
Any other questions?
Is there any update, Dave, on the volunteer firemen's exemption?
Tried. That was filed and is in place. Again,
Still at the state level, does it have to be?
it is applicable to the county at this time, but it doesn't go into effect until you basically have to put in for it before the next taxable status date next spring or in March.
Thank you.
And the same with this. If this is adopted, again, it would still would not have an impact on. It would only have an impact on the 24 school taxes and the 25. Well, no, I'm sorry, not school taxes, but the 25
County taxes?
town and county or county.
We got to do a public hearing on this as well?
Yes. And that's why it's written. The resolution is written to provide for that. Trying to think, what was it, November?
Okay, 14th, all right. Well,
That would pass, once it clears here, it will go to the board on October to be adopted at the board level, and then that would set the public hearing for the November regular board meeting.
all right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, thank you, Dave. Supervisors authorize contracts with affiliate organizations for 2024.
Support.
Support.
Just got a first and a second. Anybody talking on this one? That's true. This is for soil and water, libraries, cooperative extensions. We do it every year. Any questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Hearing none. Board of Supervisors approves resolution to introduce Seneca County Local Law I for 2023 to authorize and allocate surplus sales tax revenue in excess of budgetary revenue estimates to towns, villages of Seneca County.
So moved. Supervisor, this is the implementation of the resolution that was adopted earlier this year regarding the excess sales tax and reserve calculations. Mr. Rowe reached out to the Controller's office, got some information. I've been in touch with them as well, and so that's the basis of this law. It is basically the nuts and bolts of how to reach the number for distribution. That's how it works. The bottom line in this is that if there is no excess sales tax, or I should say if the excess sales tax does not exceed $750,000, there is no distribution.
No payment, yep, okay.
It's, was structured so as to take advantage of the final, or what you just heard tonight from the auditors, the final auditor's report, so that's filed before the 30th of September, and then the calculations would be based after that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I got a question. So this would take effect not next year, but the year after. The towns would actually see money in 2025, not 2024.
I remember how we, this is, if this is approved, I mean, it's the question of when this is approved. The local law is integral to the budget process. So if the local law is adopted prior to the adoption of the 2024 budget, then it would apply to any surplus sales tax that would be calculated in the fall of '25 and then would be payable in the fall of '25 to the towns and villages.
Dave, I'm just going to clarify on that. If we pass this in full by the full board before we pass the budget,
Correct?
can towns and villages receive a payment in fiscal year 2024? 23 now?
No.
Okay.
No,
so
because it
payment in
was,
25
because
based
it
off of
was,
24.
it's applicable to it has to be in effect for in going into the budget year. So you're looking at your sales tax income or sales tax revenue component of the 2024 budget, and so you will not have a determination of any surplus or not formally until the fall of 2025, and so that's when the distribution would occur, would be in the fall of, it's a 1-year lag basically, because the tax year ends, in this case, if this is applicable to 2024, the budget ends December 31, 2024. And then you go through the audit process, you look, we obviously will have a tentative number in the spring, but you won't have a final number until the audit is completed and you finish your reserve adjustments, et cetera.
So for those of us who do budgets, sounds like we won't have a good assumption for what to put into our 24 or even our 25 budgets at this point, because we might have a tentative number in spring of 24 for the 23
No, excuse me,
numbers.
you're,
Yep. So
right.
we can't, so we're not,
You're a year off.
if not more, for the first year.
I'm
since
just saying,
we
you
won't.
will not see any of this money until 2025. That's what I want to make sure you understand. It would be applicable to budget year 2024, but you do not know what your excess sales tax revenue, if any, is until the end of 2024, and then the final amount is not available for calculation until the audited report is available.
Yeah, so all I was saying is for those of us who enter into fall of '24 to do our budgets, we still won't have a revenue number that we can make a clear assumption on. So this will essentially be bonus revenue for us in '25, and then we might be able to have a little bit of a steady balance there.
It almost seems like every year we won't know until after our budget's what we may or may not get, so it's almost like every year it'll be.
Well,
bonus.
there will be, you'll have a as is written into the law, the county manager will report, and the finance director will report a tentative number for information purposes. Obviously, we can do that. We're looking at probably February or March. But, that is exactly that. It is a tentative number just for for consideration, but we don't have the final amount until the audited reports are done. So again, you do not, if this is adopted now, you will not see any excess sales tax revenue until the fall of '25. And you should have a number, like I said, you would have, theoretically, you should have your concrete number by October sometime in October, which, as I recall, is still within your town budget considerations. Obviously, it's simpler for the villages because their carryover, they'll have full knowledge of what their receipt would be, because they don't do their budgets until the spring afterwards. Okay? Any
thank
other
you.
questions?
Nope.
Anything else?
All those in favor? Anybody opposed? Hearing none. Interim county financial reports, that's probably Haley.
Good evening. You'll see on your desk that I passed out the year-to-date revenue report for the sales tax, hotel motel tax, and gaming revenue. I just want to report that we're still running about $1 million ahead of where we were year-to-date last year for sales tax, and to note that typically we receive 1/3 of our sales tax in the final quarter of the year, so we still anticipate ending on a good note. So any questions about the revenues?
Yeah, Haley, looks like sales tax is right on track to what you were saying, but if I'm reading this right, hotel and motel tax and gaming revenue looks down from prior years?
Slightly, except for, so the prior year that's appropriated, it's not, the appropriations, it's not looking, we still need to get in the September revenues for hotel motel, so it does lag a bit. Moving on to expenditures. So to be at the end of September, we should be at approximately 75% of the budget. Everything looks fairly good, except for in some of the smaller funds, I was noticing that the employee benefits were trending a little higher than the 75%. So what I have done is I pulled just the fringe benefits, because typically if something's trending too high of 75%, that means something's really way over, because something that's under is compensating for it. So I've pulled the employee benefits, and I'm going to dive into it a little bit deeper, but it does look like our retirement line is at 91%. So we're going to need to look at what's causing some of that to trend in that direction, and come back to you, because certainly by the end of the year, that means we're going to have some lines overdrawn. So I will report back to you on that next month, and we'll look at more what we may need for the end of the year in the retirement line. Any questions?
Oh, but nice job getting everything audit ready for the auditors. Well done.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, it seemed like we're ahead of schedule this year, on time anyway this year. It's a good deal. All right. Finance, I got some new business. That was all the regular business. Now we got some unfinished business. Supervisor authorized amendments to the 2023 budget. So that's probably you too, Haley, so stay right there.
So I did put onto your desk that there is a budget transfer resolution in the workforce development area. We just want to move some funds between expenditures for the youth participant wages and fringes.
I'd like to ask a question about this.
I have Mike Wortley here who can answer details.
Great, thank you. Mike, I guess I'm wondering, particularly for the South County, how many youth workers we have participating in hospitality or agriculture, if you can ballpark that?
I do not, but I can certainly get you that information. Some of these expenditures were from the program and the year-round programs that we have. There were a lot of businesses that had kids with additional hours. But I can certainly get you that.
And just as a follow-up, the reason I'm asking is because some years ago, when I had worked at a winery, we had applied for these funds and we were denied because the the program or decision maker didn't allow for youth workers to work at an agritourism business. And I'm wondering if that policy has been loosened or changed, or if that's something this board needs to address.
Well, that issue was directly related to the winery. At the time, we had younger youth who may have been working with wineries. And
So is that still your position? It's a little tough for me because I was a supervisor who supervised youth. And, you know, certainly wineries don't want to risk their operations by allowing youth access to alcohol, but agritourism is a really significant driver of what we're doing here in Seneca County. So if we're not going to allow young men and women to become farmers, especially in our most lucrative industry, that's pretty problematic for me. Is that policy changed, or are you still not allowing that to happen?
That's something we could look at, but we're talking several years ago, and maybe not every winery had enough staff to make sure that a youth that should have been in the fields picking grapes or other areas couldn't go and cut out to where they had access to wine.
I appreciate your feedback. I don't think your logic is sound, because then kids can't work in the pharmaceutical industry. Kids can't work in a number of industries that have access to intoxicants or whatnot.
15-year-olds can only work in certain types of places. 16 to 18 can work in others. So, something we can certainly look at. And I know this issue happened probably 4 or 5, 6 years ago.
Thank you.
Any more questions on that? We haven't got a motion on this yet.
So moved.
We got a first and a second. All right. Now it's all those in favor. Say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Hearing none. Okay. Done, Amanda. Yep, I'm done.
Thank you. Next up, Supervisor Jeff Trout, you want to recall your committee? You could, just,
Mr. Chairman, apologies. We did forget a piece of old business. So I'd like to recall the HRGO committee. We do have, this was tabled a number of times, but we finally came out of vacancy committee and was recommended, and that is to create a part-time position under the Real Property Tax Services, the GIS mapping technician.
Support.
Questions? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Or any other business that I've, all right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The committee is closed.
thank you. Next up, we have Economic Development and Tourism, Supervisor Partee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I call the Economic Development and Tourism Committee to order. Issue number 1, issue a request for qualifications for engineering services for Finger Lakes Regional Airport.
Yes, this is just something that we're required to do from FAA every 5 years, is to go out and do another request for qualifications for the engineering firm that we use at the airport. So the intent is to get the approval by sometime in October, release that, and have a selection done by the end of the year so we can get into contracts for 2024.
Any questions? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
I do have one other statement I just wanted to make if I had a chance. I just wanted to give an update. I hadn't had a chance to mention to either one of you that the EPA Brownfield grant application has opened. It opened late last week. We have had a preliminary discussion with a consulting firm to help us put together another application. The applications are going to be due in November 13th, so I anticipate coming to the next full board meeting in October with a Rule 29 to propose approval to apply for those funds. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. Okay.
Issue number 2, the Seneca County Board of Supervisors authorizes initial actions to create a public nonprofit 501c3 local development corporation to leverage collaboration with public and private partners to address the needs and objectives identified in the Seneca County Economic Development Strategy and the Housing Needs Assessment Report.
So moved.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Is there any unfinished business? Is there any new business? We are adjourned, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next up, we have Health and Human Services Supervisor Borst.
Thank you, Chairman Alonso. I will call the Health and Human Services Committee to order. Issue number 1, Board approves the 10E11 electronic health record contract renewal.
Hi, so we use an electronic health record in our mental health department. It's how we document our services. It's how we do our billing. We had a 5-year contract with 10E11, which is a small company out of Buffalo, and we are now up for renewal. It has increased by about $17,000, which for the most part includes additional licenses and prescribers that we have in the department.
Any questions from the committee? All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Issue number 2, County Manager authorized and directed to sign contracts with FLH Medical PC and Finger Lakes Community Health for STD testing and treatment services.
Support.
Scott?
Thank you. So Seneca County Health Department is required under Article 6 of the Public Health Law to provide testing and treatment for sexually transmitted infections or sexually transmitted diseases. As a reminder, we are the payer of last resort, so insurances are billed first and so forth. But we partner with Finger Lakes Health and Finger Lakes Community Health, so the urgent care here in Seneca Falls, Community Health down in Ovid, to provide testing and treatment for those infections. Those 3-year contracts are set to expire December 31st. Both those entities have been excellent partners, and we'd like to continue that relationship.
All right. Any questions from the committee? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I'm going to allow Scott to speak for a few minutes about some information, some updates from the health department.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll try to be brief. First, you all should have on your desks a copy of our most recent newsletter. I mentioned that because, 1, there's a lot of great information in there, and 2, a couple of things I'm going to talk about have pages dedicated within that. I'll call it a publication. Our public health educators collect the information from various staff throughout the health department, and I think they put together a real professional-looking magazine. So one of the things I just want to remind folks of is our annual household hazardous waste collection event is this Saturday. Now, some of the information we put out had an earlier deadline to register, but truth is we are still taking registrations because we still have openings. So if your friends, neighbors, and whatnot from Seneca County have some waste that they don't know what to do with, they can register. There's a link to that both in this newsletter and on our website. We do prefer folks do the online registration, but if anybody has difficulty with technology, our environmental health staff will certainly take their call and get them registered. So there's still a little bit of time to sign up for that. And that's down in Romulus. I think it's on Prospect Street off 96, the Highway Barns, where it's been for many years. Something else I wanted to mention, I'm actually splitting our department on Saturday. We're going to have folks down there working with Clean Harbors at Household Hazardous Waste. We are also required, as part of our public health emergency preparedness readiness, to do an annual drill. Years ago, I was part of some drills where, I kid you not, we gave out packages of M&Ms to practice drills. I, as a staff person at that time, didn't get a heck of a lot out of that, and I noticed those around me didn't either. So I prefer a drill that does something useful for the community. So we still have the COVID ELC grant on the books. So we spent some of that federal and state grant dollars to purchase at-home COVID test kits. We're going to be dispensing those at our building Saturday morning between 10 and noon. While supplies last, we have a good quantity of those. We're allowing 3 boxes per family. There's 2 tests in each box, so anybody that drives through, there's no pre-registration required. They can go home with as many as 6 tests. We chose to do that. We initially, truthfully, considered doing a drive-through flu clinic. However, 1, you can get a vaccine for flu on every street corner, it seems nowadays. 2, the flu vaccine was kind of pricey. And we also couldn't get guaranteed delivery of that until later in October or even November. And putting nurses out on a parking lot for a drive-through drill to give shots through windows. Given that it's a drill and not an emergency, we'd do that if it was an emergency, but given that it's a drill, we opted for dispensing the COVID test kits. And we've also noticed a significant surge in COVID cases. There's test kits going out our door hourly every day right now, people walking in asking for those. So it seemed like we were, staff had brought to me that was probably a greater need than doing the flu shots. So that's going to happen this Saturday as well. And I also wanted to I wanted to communicate to the board the transition in the COVID vaccinations. So for many years, especially in this county, your health department gave an awful lot of the vaccines that people received. That is now transitioning because the vaccine is going private, more or less. It's the privatization of the vaccine. We are transitioning to providing the COVID vaccine to those folks who do not have health insurance or who have health insurance that doesn't cover routine vaccination. So we'll still fill that void for folks, which we do with our routine childhood vaccinations and others. But for everyone else, whether you have Medicare or whether you have private health insurance of some other kind, we'll be directing those folks to go to pharmacies, to go to their healthcare providers to receive those vaccines, both COVID and the new RSV vaccine for adults. So we're still going to fill that void. And I've also learned from some of my colleagues and counterparts across the state, there are very few local health departments that are purchasing a little bit of vaccine, the COVID vaccine, but it's $1,800 for every 10 doses. So even the big county health departments, Erie, Onondaga, whatnot, they're only getting a limited amount of that vaccine for special cases. We get it free to provide to folks who do not have insurance, so that doesn't cost us anything. But if we were to purchase it and do the big clinics like we did back in the day during COVID, that would cost us an exorbitant amount. So we've transitioned to filling that niche again for the uninsured and underinsured. So I just wanted to communicate that. And I'm, obviously willing to answer any questions or concerns that you might have.
I got a question, Scott. So I know originally the doses, they would go bad if you opened it up. Is this the same if you get 10 doses and you only get one? Do you throw 9 out and the new stuff, or?
So yeah, there's an expiration to the vaccine. The thing is, for a VFC, which is Vaccines for Children, or VFA, Vaccines for Adults clinic, which we're licensed for both, the vaccines are given to us for free by the state, and if they give us 10 doses and we throw away 9 out of 10 or even 10 out of 10, they don't care. But we're required to keep some of that on hand if we're going to offer or maintain a VFC or VFA clinic. But if I purchase them privately, then they cost a lot.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions for Scott? All right, thank you, Scott.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
We do our best to do a quarterly newsletter. We put links in there for like our quarterly free rabies vaccination clinics and things. So we do have a distribution list. They do go to, they go to a majority of the town and village offices. We've also, and we tried to keep tabs on, if we gave 10 to a particular town last month and we go back, a couple months later with the next quarterly newsletter. If 9 are still sitting there, then maybe we only provide a couple. If we gave you 10 and they all disappeared and the clerk calls us and wants more, then we try to keep a reserve. We've also tried to expand the reach a little bit, providers, waiting rooms. Connie's Restaurant has a supply for folks to sit and peruse while they're waiting to place their order, that type of thing. So you're welcome.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Issue 3, clerk of the board to advertise for Office of the Aging public hearing.
Support.
Second.
All right. Any discussion onto it? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Issue 4, Board of Supervisors approve appointment of Finger Lakes Workforce Investment Board member.
Support.
All right, Mike?
Good evening. This request came from Jeff Shipley from the Chamber of Commerce to refill a board position which was previously held by the county manager as the designated person on the board. So this is to move Kyle into that position through June 30, 2025.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, carries. Issue number 5, Board of Supervisors authorize use of opioid settlement funds to support Four Towns Community Center proposed activities in support of substance abuse prevention among adults and youth in the community.
Support.
All right, Margaret.
Thank you. So we're proposing that we give $5,000 a year for the next 5 years to the four-town community centers to provide for equipment, scholarships, to allow them to expand their reach. We know that children being involved in sports and these sorts of pro-social activities is one of the greatest prevention efforts that we can do. And we are aware through a lot of the work that we do in our own prevention work that the south end of the county is sorely lacking in opportunities for pro-social activities for our children and families. Fort Town Community Center has been providing these services for quite some time. They pay out of pocket for a lot of scholarships, and they would love to really never have to say no to any family. So we're proposing, the Community Services Board reviewed this proposal, and they are in support, as was the members of the ad hoc, the Opioid Settlement Fund Ad hoc Committee who attended our meeting. And we are proposing that we do this on an annual basis, so $5,000 a year to the programming, and the reporting would be monitored by the Community Services Board. So Fort Town Community Center would be required to report on an annual basis to the Community Services Board, who would then make recommendations to the County Board of Supervisors regarding continuing the funding into the next year.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. And issue number 6, Board accepts Department of Human Services, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration Certified Community Behavioral Health Center Planning, Development, and Implementation Grant.
Support.
Second.
So this is a $1 million a year for 4-year grant for a total of $4 million to the Mental Health Department to help us further integrate our services, enhance our services, lower our caseloads, provide more coordination of healthcare services for a population of people we serve who often are not seeking any primary care services. So it's a federal grant, and yeah, so I'm asking for approval to accept these funds.
All right. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries.
Thank you.
Any unfinished business? New business, I have a resolution that was provided by the Northeast College of Health Sciences. They would like us to pass a resolution proclaiming the month of October as National Chiropractic Health Month.
Support.
Second.
Any discussion on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Any other new business? Mr. Chairman, we're adjourned.
Thank you. Next up, we got Public Safety and Criminal Justice, Supervisor Reinhardt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Issue 1, accept fiscal year 2023 Emergency Management Performance Grant.
Support.
So this is a grant we actually receive every year, the EMPG grant. There's no local match to this grant. This year will be $16,904, and it goes towards salaries and emergency management to offset the taxpayer costs.
Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Issue 2, accept fiscal year 2023 State Homeland Security Program Grant.
Support.
So go ahead.
So this year we're receiving, and this is an annual grant we receive as well, $51,215. 35% of that award goes to law enforcement, so it goes to the sheriff's office, which is $17,925. The rest stays with emergency management. However, we have different priority areas that we have to cover, such as cybersecurity, intel and info sharing, domestic terrorism, community preparedness, election security. different target areas that we have to meet for this grant, and there's no local match.
Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Issue 3, resolution supporting direct pay reimbursement of ambulance services.
Support.
Thank you. This is basically a letter or a resolution encouraging Governor Hochul to sign a Senate bill, an Assembly bill that is passed that will force Medicare and Medicaid to pay ambulance bills directly to the ambulance company and not the recipient. All those in favor? Aye. Carried. There is no unfinished business. Is there any new business? Hearing none. Public safety is closed, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next up, we got water and sewer treatment management operations. Supervisor Don Trout.
Thank you, Chairman. Is there any ongoing issues in water and sewer? Who would take care of that? It's not me. Kyle?
So, Mr. Chairman, when the issue I rose and I think I sent to the Chairman Hayes was moving ahead with the next step with the Water and Sewer Authority.
I mean, what would be the next step? I mean, we have the MRB was doing whatever they were doing.
The county manager and I met with MRB a couple weeks, sorry. September 12th.
Yes, so the results of the MRB study conclusively state that an independent water sewer authority is the proper way to go. Our next steps would be essentially trying to figure out what avenue we would like to go, and as a committee here, figure out if that's hiring an individual for an interim director or an executive to help guide us in that direction, or for direct creation of a water and sewer authority right out the gate.
My personal opinion would be that the board make some sort of committee that will eventually turn into that board and let them handle it, you know, and they can report back to us, and then, you know, we'll give them our stamp of approval, or we'll say, you know, you're way out of base and we won't move forward. But maybe this committee would bring it to the full board with some suggestions or some names, or we put it out there. Yeah, put it out there in the community who those might be, and get on the interviewing and figure out whether we want 3 people, 5 people, and then let that be sort of a steering committee for everybody else. All right, second? Second. Motion made and probably seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there any other business to come before the Water and Sewer Committee?
Just a reminder that those Romulus, Varick, and Fayette will do those readings this week, or what?
27th.
27th, yep.
Well, that came up quick. Is there anything else? If not, we're adjourned.
Thank you. I think that's all we have for tonight. Thank you very much.